When the four male dancers slowed down their swirls and the procession was about to move forward, they stopped because the quiet female dancer who carried 5 brass pots decorated with garlands started her solo performance. She danced towards the MP. Passing the drummers, she knelt down facing the MP, still perfectly balancing the 5 brass pots on her head, and started an amorous movement with sensual sways. She moved in a circle on her knees, making gestures of worship towards Soiza, the MP, not worrying about the muddy patches on the concrete floor that tainted her beautiful costume. The crowd was impressed and applauded in joy. The dancer moved slowly towards Soiza on her knees to greet him, and the bodyguards couldn't help give her a little space to approach their master. They still stood right next to MP Soiza like pillars, but she was so close, so close. Yes, it was Shalini, the patient, avenging tigress. She stood up for the final part of the dance, which was a fast, continuous swirl. In the same way that she had rehearsed at Trincomalee for the gruesome performance, she danced. It was a reenactment. The difference was, this time she carried deadly TNT strapped into her hollow breast, the breast she had emptied for one single purpose, to fill with incendiary explosives. She swirled, gradually spinning faster. The beautifully embroidered white frills of her long skirt flew in the air, and the garlands hanging down from the brass pots on her head floated in the air, creating beautiful colored wheels made of illusionary, colorful hoops. Later, she closed her eyes to enter into a trance. A bit later, she opened her eyes, continued to swirl in a trance. Then the astonished crowd cheered and whooped and also sang Sadhu, 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 as if she were a divine creature come to worship the Buddha. The drums, the music, the singing, the yelling, and the chanting blurred into the fog of a near death experience that blended with Shalini's past, present, and future. As Shalini was swirling, she saw the blurred images. She saw a row of Buddhist monks in saffron robes pressing their palms together, so serene, to welcome the guest. She saw a young girl in a lama sari, a white dress carrying a bundle of blue lotuses, staring at her, astonished and as if she was frightened for some reason. She also saw the white dome and the pinnacle of the Buddhist stupa that stood up to the sky to reach the heaven, the infinity. With sedated rage, she closed her eyes again and pulled the detonator that was hidden under her blouse. And it was the end. So the reading was from Tigers Don't Confess, Visakesa Chandrasekaram's novel from 2011. A novel I really admire, a novel I really enjoyed reading when I first came across it. Set around the Sri Lankan Civil War, dealing with many complex issues emerging from it. The centerpiece being a young Tamil youth accused of being a pistol squad member of the Liberation Tigers, the LTTE, and he's standing trial. And he's about to be convicted to a long jail sentence. He has already been in custody for so many years. And the story kind of develops as this young man's lawyer, himself a novice, successfully challenges the evidence against the youth. The main evidence being a confession that the young man has supposedly given the police. So in court, it is proven that this evidence is actually a fabrication, something concocted out of the good imagination of the police. And Visakesa Chandrasekaram, actually, his postgraduate research was also based on a similar premise, how confessionary evidence has been used in Sri Lanka to prosecute mainly Tamil prisoners, but prisoners who were persons who were taken into custody under the Counter-Terrorism or Prevention of Terrorism Act laws during the Long War. So this PhD study, which was later published under the title "The Use of Confessionary Evidence under the Counter-Terrorism Laws of Sri Lanka," this was published in 2017. It is based on 24 cases, very similar to the case of the young man in Tigers Don't Confess. In fact, one chapter of the PhD publication is also titled "Do Tigers Confess?" So this is Visakesa Chandrasekaram. This is my entry point to Visakesa, a writer for whom I have great admiration, not only for his writing, but the way he kind of weaves together so many different interest areas of his life, art, education, and activism being three of them, the three most relevant to me as a respondent. And perhaps in our time, the time we are passing through, perhaps well, only or maybe one of very few Sri Lankan writers who kind of bring these three tiers into conference at some point. Visakesa Chandrasekaram's entry into Sri Lanka's English language literary circuits, it happens about 10 years before Tigers Don't Confess. This is not his first effort. The kind of highlight he makes a highlight as he enters the literary scene. It starts with a high note, with a Gratian Award-winning play called Forbidden Area, 2000 or 2001 as I remember, for which the Gratian Trust, I think they awarded a joint Gratian Plum that year, Visakesa, for Forbidden Area, which he shared with Neil Fernandopulle, the writer of Shrapnel, the short story collection. Reasonably good short stories too, a couple of them in Shrapnel. But Fernandopulle has kind of disappeared from the literary scene. After that point, I personally haven't encountered him. Later on, I'm not very sure whether he has publications since, but not to my knowledge. In a sense, Chandrasekaram also disappeared around the same time, because I think the 2000s he spends out of Sri Lanka, studies and work elsewhere. And then he kind of makes a comeback with Tigers Don't Confess. These post-war novels, soon after the war, published in 2011, incidentally coinciding with my 2011 novel, Fear of Gambling, which has nothing to do with the war in the way Visakesa kind of engages with it. But since then, he has kind of flourished, come of age as an artist, occupying kind of a multimodal ground, which includes his work as a novelist, King and the Assassin, the one that came after Tigers Don't Confess, which was bilingually published in 2014, the Sinhala version being titled Raja Saha Ghatakya, King and the Assassin, the English version of it. And then also two notable films, Frangipani or Sayapeti Kusum, as it is called in Sinhala. And then these days, this recording being done in 2020, Visakesa Chandrasekaram being kind of a billboard figure for his production of Paangshu, a film set around another conflict zone, a passage of conflict, the 1987-90 emergency, centered on the journey of a mother who is seeking justice for her lost son. Complicated scenario there, and a fairly critically acclaimed, and a movie that is making headlines in all available media. Um, but for me, Chandrasekaram's significance goes a little bit beyond the initial or the first reaction that I have to some of this work, which I rank quite high. And my main interest in Chandrasekaram's work desk emerges from a concern he has for human rights, as I mentioned upfront, marginal identities, but more so because the kind of encapsulating force where all these things get factored in is his response to this gigantic, multifanged beast that we call the state. So, as an artist, the kind of engagement Chandrasekaran shows in his relentless response to the state and state excesses, whether it is matters of prosecuting people under extraordinary laws, imaginative evidence, fraudulent law enforcement, or whether it is a matter of cinematically addressing issues dealing with gender, sexual identity, and so on. It is a direction that Chandrasekaram kind of collects in negotiating with the state as a whole. So this is very important for me because I myself have an academic as well as a reader interest in some of these areas and in the kind of response Chandrasekaram kind of aims at. He's also someone who writes with vigor, with energy. He's also a very good storyteller. Case at point, Tigers Don't Confess. Very good story. It's the kind of story I can't write. I mean, I have tried to keep audiences engaged with my writing and miserably failed 14 years running. But his is a it's an action-packed thriller which is not simplistic, which is complex, which kind of cuts through several layers, several tiers at the same time, but keeping the reader gripped, as the saying goes. And I think the same can be said about King and the Assassin. The second novel, I don't think it has actually kind of gone into the readers as much as it should have. It hasn't earned the kind of critical response, a critical merit, because if you take King and the Assassin, underlying the surface story, he kind of Chandrasekaram kind of deals with several innovative spheres, including a concern for ecology, which I don't think academics have picked up so far. But let me keep that aside for a moment and go on with the kind of discussion I have initiated around the case of rights and so on. Now, coming back to a point that I raised earlier, Chandrasekaram's being an artist and his interest in activism, and also him being in education. And these are like the three pillars that I identify on which Chandrasekaram's work is balanced. And also adding to that the fact that Chandrasekaram is trilingual, so his consciousness, his imagination, it has been enriched by a trilingual heritage, and also the fact that he kind of works across media, because he's also a kind of a dancer, a performer, as well as a brilliant songwriter. Now there's this song, I think it came in a CD or an album that accompanied King and the Assassin, Rajasagataka. There's a a very famous song. I think this has made the rounds on social media and so on. It's titled Nubeammaita Kalui. In about 3.5 minutes, Chandrasekaram very skillfully unpacks the kind of myths that surround our modern day identity formation, pleasingly, memorably, but economically in 3.5 minutes. So it's this kind of guy. In my leisurely moods, I not only leisurely moods, I do this wherever I talk about Chandrasekaram. I call him a Renaissance man. Maybe Renaissance plus should be the term. Definitely a gifted artist around us for all the reasons that I have mentioned so far. Now, there are a couple of things I want to include into this interaction about Chandrasekaram, which kind of opens a gateway or an avenue for us artists, for us readers, for us creators of works of art, people who engage with these kind of cultural domains to take our work forward. One is a point Chandrasekaram raised recently in an engagement, a kind of a conversation he was having with Upul Shant Sannasgala. Upul Shant has a YouTube program called Sannata Sammukavima. So Sannata Sammukavima part 2 or episode 2 or 3 was with Chandrasekaram post Paangshu. And in that engagement, Chandrasekaram referred to a kind of a code of silence we have as a conflict community, a code of silence we have agreed to, where we don't talk about mass atrocity, the kind of enforced disappearances, killings, um, rape, conflict related rape, to put into one shell everything we have experienced from 1971 through 87-90 to the closing stages of the war, 2009, and the post-war um, atrocities, the kind of allegations from which the state is actually playing hopscotch all this time, the past decade or so. So Chandrasekaram says that we as a community contribute to this through a code of silence where we don't actually talk about these things. We are okay to let the veils of time demote these serious problems into oblivion, into silence, and to keep on moving. So, in a way, Paangshu, a film like that, can be taken as a response to this silence, to make the voice of the silenced heard, and for the quest for justice to be kept alive and furthered through a creative means. Secondly, Chandrasekaram's observation makes us focus on the crucial matter of witness and survivor narratives, the kind of community we belong to, the kind of time that we are passing as a community. Because we have from the JVP related emergency 87-90, we have a steady body of witnessing, witness narratives, narratives based on memory having emerged in the last 30 years. It's a bit prevalent now, not so much in the first 10 years after the conflict, understandably. But from about 2000, we have more and more people coming out to document and to preserve the memories, the experiences, things they have gone through and witnessed. Now, the same thing can be seen in relation to the civil war. In the Tamil language, these literatures are more prevalent. They are also prevalent in the English language, especially people communicating through what you call secondary witnesses or mediums. We have a body of writing which represent or which encapsulate the memories and the witness stories of people who survived the war coming out. Not so much in the Sinhala language. So there are a few translations, like former Liberation Tigers political division front woman Subramaniam Sivakami, better known as Tamalini. Tamalini's autobiography, supposedly, it was translated to Sinhala by Saminathan Vimal, Jaffna University academic. But um, I've always cautioned people against this autobiography because Tamalini was writing as a prisoner of war. She was writing under the gaze of the state. So I don't expect that it can take us too far beyond the rigid baton of a censor, or worse still, self-censorship. But very clearly, the kind of literature we should focus, we should encourage, and we should make a space for has to come from witnesses and survivors of conflict. Because without embracing these literatures, without making them a part of our public discourse, the distance we can cover as a post-conflict community is very little. And from here onwards, the path ahead cannot be complete for a community like ours without embracing these literatures, the literatures that make us uncomfortable, that make us walk out of that safe zone that we occupy as readers in relating to the multiple crises, political crises of our time.